I believe that all of us had dreams, or what we can call desires. It's interesting, when we were younger, it's like we lived in this world filled with endless possibilities. We saw what we wanted to be and become, and somehow it was almost tangible. Majority of us will agree with me that, you dream, like for me, I remember when I was younger, I would see myself with my beautiful family, with my beautiful wife and beautiful children. I won't say the number, lest what I say here will be held against me. But I'll see my children, I'll see my palatial home, hallelujah, and my dream cars. Anybody feeling me over here? I'll see myself traveling from country to country for business, where my businesses will be housed. I don't know whether you guys are feeling me really on this one. But, these dreams were almost tangible. I could see myself in this. How many of us, especially the boys, but also some ladies, how many of us will, whenever your parents will park their car, you'll go and sit in the car and just imagine yourself as a driver? How many of us will do that? And oftentimes I'll go and sit and I don't know, and I'll even envision the route that, and I'll change the gears. Oh man, those were fun times, I don't know what you guys will say, but they were just fun times. Some of us saw ourselves in lab coats, as doctors. Then there are those of us who probably saw ourselves as in police uniform. We were cops, Okay, well, not that way. Some of us even saw ourselves as lawyers in courts. And then there are those of us who even, probably the ones who are born in late 80s, early 90s, you saw yourself as a DJ, rocking the party away, and enjoying yourself. There are those of us who are probably even, especially those who grew up in the computer generation. You somehow believe that you can invent and make things bigger and become richer than Bill Gates. And you actually believed it. Right? And then, here's the thing. How many of us used to watch wrestling? In fact, just shout it out. Who was your favorite wrestler? I haven't had a thing. But it was interesting how many of us actually believe that we can do the stuff that those guys used to do. How many of us remember Jimmy Superfly Snuka? Okay, I just quoted my age. Some of you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, WWF is not that. There's that. Is it a non-governmental organization called WWF? The one that has a panda. It's not that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about wrestling. Okay? So there's Jimmy Superfly Snuka, and it's interesting, I have two brothers, and I used to sleep on the upper side of a double decker, and our eldest brother used to sleep on just a single bed on the side. And I remember oftentimes, I'll arrange pillows and I'll imagine that this is a guy, and I'll go up on my bed and I will jump to the other bed. But I'm still alive, hallelujah. And you can call it naivety, you can call it faith, whatever it is that you want to call it. Those were pretty exciting times. We had dreams, and we loved them, and we talked about them. But then life happened. Those of us who wanted to be doctors and aspired to be doctors encountered something called biology in high school. And your dream was last seen heading. Okay? Then there are those of us who wanted to be cops. And during one of your escapades at night, you encountered bad cops. And you've just grown, you had these bad cops, and that's where your dream ended. There are those of us who wanted to be actuaries or actuarial scientists, right? But then they encountered something called a logbook. And I'm not talking about the one for cars. And that's the point where their dreams were logged out. There are those of us who even wanted to sing. But then your primary or your high school music teacher told you you have a perfect voice for poems. So keep talking, but no singing. This is funny. A very good friend of mine, he watched a kung fu movie. And he actually believed that he could be a ninja when he grew up. Let me tell you, life happened on him in the form of a slap from his caring mother. That dream was ninja'd away. He's never talked about being a ninja or even watch kung fu movies. And we could go on and on. I can give you many examples, and we can talk about this. We can reminisce about our dreams and what could have been. But the reality is that life happened. And life continues to happen. But here's the thing. It's not just that the bad stuff happened. You know, when I say that life happens for our dreams, it's not just that the bad stuff happened. You know, there are even some certain areas where we can begin to see the good things that happen. Those of us, maybe you are not a doctor right now, but you went to a school where you were able to make some very good friends who've become your long-term friends. There are those of us who are here and probably you desired to get married. And God exceeded your expectation and He gave you a husband or a wife who you did not even know that you needed. God has exceeded your expectations, so life has turned out very well. You had a desire to get into business, and you got into business, and now you're just moving on up. Things are working out for you. Some of us maybe even came from a poor background, but somehow God blessed you, and you got some of the best education that you can think of. In fact, some of us can only wish for that kind of education. So good stuff has happened. And there are great things. There are certain areas of our lives where things have happened, and we thank God for that. We thank God for those great things, and we can go on and on naming them. However, there are certain areas or desires that you have that still find you in the waiting room. There are certain areas that work, but there are certain areas that you've been praying and hoping for a breakthrough, but nothing yet. Everything else seems to be working perfectly, except this one area, or for some of us, several areas in our lives. You have your career going, you're moving on up, everything is working out, but on this one hand, someone that you love, or you were diagnosed with a terminal illness. On the one side, you know, you have great friends and you have a great family that just loves on you and takes care of you. In fact, they've been praying for you for miracles. And you've been praying, and they've even prayed for you to get a spouse, but no one has responded to your invites yet. No one has knocked on your door. On the one hand, you find that, you know what, God has blessed you with a beautiful marriage, with a beautiful man. But on the other hand, no child yet. And every month, you're disappointed. You feel like God set you up for disappointment. On the one hand, it's working, the marriage is perfect, but then on this other hand, there is no child. You went to great schools. In fact, you graduated with first-class honors. But you feel like you're the recipient of all the crappy jobs in town. That everything that is bad comes to you. You have a beautiful family of your own, you and your wife and your kids, but you're still fighting with your father, you're still fighting with your parents, you're always at loggerheads. And whenever you think that things are getting better, they're getting worse. But your family looks like it's working perfectly. You have made it financially on this one hand. In fact, you drive the best car, you live in the best neighborhoods, you're dressed by the best. But on the one hand, you're battling with insecurities. You have low self-esteem. And whatever it is, you know what that area is. You know what those things I'm talking about. You know that individual that I'm talking about. Whatever it is, whenever you see this one area of your life, your face sinks with disappointment. Your face sinks with disillusionment, with fear, with despair. You have no expectations of God to come through ever. And as a result, we've somehow developed these coping mechanisms because we need to move on. In fact, here's the thing. We have branded those things or that area as a no-go zone. We don't go there. With my friend, we just don't go there. With my spouse, we just don't go there. Because every time you have gone there, every time you have tried to address that issue, you feel like it has worsened. You feel like the situation moves from bad to worse. We just don't go there. Even in your prayer closet, when you are alone with God, we can talk about everything else. You can raise everything to God, but when it comes to this one, no. God, we can't go there. Because you've disappointed me one too many times. And you know what I'm talking about. You know that situation that I'm talking about. And we begin to say things like, if God really wants me to have this, then He will bless me with it. If He really cares about me, then He should give me this. And because life must move on, because anyway, this thing seems to be working and we need to go on, we develop what we call coping mechanisms. You figure out how to maneuver through life. In fact, the mantra of our lives has become, let's make do with what we have. This is what has been handed to me. Let me continue with that. and your trust in God has hit rock bottom. You no longer trust in God. In fact, you're even wondering whether God really cares about your desires. I know I'm talking to somebody here. If you're joining this conversation today, last week we began this series and it's titled Running on Empty. And the question that we're trying to address, what do you do? What do you do when you feel like your faith has run empty? What do you do when you feel like your trust in God has run to empty? What do you do when you feel like you're faced with challenges at every turn of your life? What do you do when you feel like you've run out of options and your life is running on empty? And last week we encountered this lady who was running on empty. You know, this amazing, her life started, in fact, it was one of those cases from grace to grace, because her life started very well. In fact, her and her husband were caring for the society. They were doing good for the society. But then she lost her husband. Not only that, she began to lose everything that she owned to debt, because they had acquired so much debt. And we encountered her story when she was about to lose her 2 sons, because the law back then was such that if you owed anyone money and you had not paid, the thing was that they will take your sons into slavery until the debt was paid. And so we encountered her story when she was about to lose her sons. And the only thing that she had left was only a small jar of olive oil. And Elisha, the prophet, the man of God, walks into her life. And we find that Elisha invites her to believe and trust in God one more time, because God had one more move in her life. And he invited her to give God the little that she had, that one small jar of olive oil. And not only was she able to pay her debt, but she also saved her sons, and she had enough to live on. And the lesson that we learned last week is that the little that you have could be all that God needs. So today I want to introduce us to another lady. I want to share another story and sort of just give you the big picture of this. Her situation is slightly different. But we encounter this lady, and it's a story that majority of us will be able to identify with. Because this lady, by all standards in society, was well-to-do. In fact, you know, she was considered as great. She was considered as an influential person. People called her and referred to her as a well-to-do lady. It looked like her life was perfect. Everything was going on for her. She was married, and it looked like their marriage was doing very well. They had a beautiful home. In fact, the home had some amazing sceneries. And the thing is that they also probably had invested in several businesses, including farming, because her husband owned large pieces of land. And then the thing is this, we find that they were also a religious couple, because they knew, when you read into their story, they knew of God and they knew about God. So probably several times they'll go to the temple and they will sit there to hear the teachings of God's word. To top it all, they were extremely generous. Extremely generous. In fact, when you read their story, you'll find that they were naturally of a benevolent disposition, because these guys were accustomed to acts of hospitality and generosity. They used their wealth to help others. And it was only a matter of time before this great couple met the prophet Elijah. Now, Elisha was one of those people who was known by many people. Because the high and mighty in society and the lowly in society knew about Elisha, because he had done some great things. God had used him to do some amazing stuff in that nation. So it was only a matter of time before this lady noticed that Elisha passes through their town several times, and their town was called Shunem. And we find that Elijah will pass through this town several times. And what the lady does is that one day she invites Elisha into her home to have a meal. And since that day, whenever the prophet would rock up into town, he will go to this lady's house to have a meal. But they didn't stop there with the generosity, because they were a generous couple. They decided that, you know what, we're going to do more. And the lady walks up to her husband. And this is what she says to her husband. She says that, you know what, this prophet, this holy man of God always passes through this town. Why don't we put up a guest wing at the rooftop of our house? You know, a room where we can furnish it with a bed, with a lamp, with a desk, so that whenever he comes through this town, he can stay at our house. And of course, the husband did not object, and they went ahead and did that. Now, we don't know how long later, but we find that we are told that Elisha one day walks up to his upper room. So they finish building and he walks up to his upper room. And he's so moved by the generosity of this couple that he feels like there must be something that I have to do for this couple. So he calls his servant's name was Gehazi. He calls his servant and says, you know what, call for me the lady, because there's something that we must do for this lady. There has to be something that we can do. I can petition God for something for her. And you find this story in the book of 2 Kings chapter 4. Now, we read 2 Kings chapter 4 from verse 1 to 7. And what happened is from verse 1 to 7 is that this is the story that we encountered last week. Now we continue from verse 8, and you find that from verse 8, this is where the story comes in. But I want to jump to verse 13, because that is where you find the story of Elisha having the conversation with the woman in the presence of his servant. And he says this to Gehazi, tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? And then Elisha goes ahead and says, can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army? Now, pause there. Here's the thing. Elisha had influence with the high and mighty. So he had audience with the king. So he could be able to petition whatever it is that he wanted the king. And here he goes. In fact, it's like he removes his check and gives the lady a blank leaf. And he's like, whatever it is that you want. In fact, I'm even suggesting something that might seem difficult. Do you want me to petition the king on your behalf? Maybe he thought that maybe she had an issue that if she can be able to petition the king to solve for her. Maybe she needed protection from the army commander. Can you imagine if that was in our context? And someone came and said, you know what, I can put a good word for you for the president. Some of us will be like, as you're talking, as we're reaching for our files, and you're like, you know what, there's a tender that I've been trying to submit. Even that road from Mount Carmel to Shunem, it needs to be expanded, and I think I can be able to do that. Some of us will jump at this opportunity. How many people will jump at this opportunity to meet with the king? But then look at the lady's response, because this is what she says. She says, no, my family takes good care of me. Wow. You've been given a blank leaf. Ask for whatever it is that you want. But she says, my family takes good care of me. What an amazing story, because she's content with what she has. She's content with where she is at. Or so she makes us think. But she is contented. And with her humility, she denies Elisha's offer and she walks away. But Elisha is still convinced that there must be something. We have to do something for her. What can we do for her? He's convinced that he talks to the servant and says, what can we do for her? Now, here's the thing about his servant. And his servant must have been a very observant man. But I also want to believe that he was being used of God. Because the servant notices something that you wouldn't easily pick from this woman's life. In fact, you will probably take it for granted considering the contented life that she lived. Here's the thing, majority of us, whenever we come into a space like this, we all look cool, calm, and collected. We all look like we have everything put together. You're dressed very well. You drive the best car. You speak very well, and you have great friends. And it looked like everything is working for you. And I suggest to us that this is where this lady was. It looked like everything was working for her. But listen to what the servant says. He notices something, and this is what he picks. He says, just put up the next verse. Gehazi replied, Gehazi replied, she doesn't have a son. And even her husband is an old man. And quickly, Elisha does not hesitate at this proposal. And he sends the servant to go quickly and get this lady. And he brings the lady, and while they are still at the doorway, in verse 15, you see that this is what Elisha says. When the woman returned, while she's still at the doorway, next year, at this time, you will be holding a son in your arms. If it was in our day and age, he'll be like, receive. Because that's what he's saying here. In fact, while she's still standing at the doorway, next year, a time like now, you'll be holding a son in your arms. But look at the lady's response, because this is what she says. No, my Lord. No, my Lord. Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that. And right there, we are introduced to her no-go zone. That one area in her life that we don't go there, Elisha. We don't go there. For this woman, everything else in her life was going well. It was working perfectly. But this was a culture, and you need to understand the context, where having a son was considered to be a great thing. In ancient times, not only did the firstborn son receive a double portion of the inheritance, but he was also dedicated to be used of the Lord. So for a woman like her, having a son was seen as a blessing. And for a woman like her to not give her husband a son, it might have been seen as very shameful. And this is probably why the lady was at this destitute place. She had probably lived with the disappointment of trusting God with her desires for many years. She was in that place, but God had not come through for her. And now her husband has advanced in age to sire a child. And in as far as faith and trust in God, in this one area of this lady's life was concerned, she was running on empty. Maybe she had tried different things. Maybe she had gone to Mount Carmel to pray. Maybe she had gone and been prayed for by a pastor or one of the prophets. And all this did not work. And she gave up. And she learned how to live without her desire. She developed coping mechanisms with all the pressure and the stigmatization. And I want to put it to you that the stigmatization of a barren woman back in the day was pretty harsh than what we think. It was catastrophic for her. So she created her own coping mechanisms that will help her sail through. She moved on, and she didn't even want anyone to ever bring this up lest she gets disappointed again. And just like this lady, this is our story. This is our story. I think about my life and I feel this lady. I do. Because I feel like there are things that are brought to God one too many times. But he still hasn't come through for me. Nothing has happened yet. There are many things that I've brought to God for my personal life, for my family. But he hasn't answered. There are many things that I've brought to God about this ministry. But I still feel like he hasn't answered. And for many of us, you know that there's so many things. There's probably even one thing that right now is ringing in your head, and you know that this is the one thing that God has disappointed me in. And as a result, we've learned to cope. And I suspect that is the case with many of us here today. The issues that have become our no-go zone. You had high hopes to get a child. You waited on the Lord for a very long time. And every month you were disappointed when it didn't happen. Every night you would cry for healing for your father. Every night you'll cry for your own healing. But nothing will change, and you've learned how to live with it. You will cry yourself to sleep every night because of that relationship or lack thereof. And you've learned how to put a facade because you have to cope. You have desired maybe to go back to school, but neither you nor your parents can afford to pay for your school fees. And you feel like, God, I'm not asking for more. I'm not asking for extravagance. I'm just asking for this one thing. But because God hasn't come through for you, like this lady, we move on. We stop asking. We stop hoping. We stop expecting that God will come through for us. We stop expecting that God will even move in that. We even lower our expectations of God. We're like, God, for me to be safe, it's okay. Let me not even believe much of you. We've lowered our expectations so much that even when a miracle-working prophet walks through these doors, even when you come to church and hear a word like this, you refuse to accept or even expect anything good to come out of it because you fear to be disappointed. Some of us even get to the place where we deny a word like this because we are thinking, you know what, this is not for me. This is for other people. Because my case, I don't even think God can be able to handle this one. Now, here's the thing. The passage doesn't tell us Elisha's response to this lady's comment. It doesn't tell us that. And I wonder, And I hope some of you can wonder with me in this situation. And I'm leading to something here. And I wonder if Elisha sat in that home. I mean, we are told that this is a well-to-do woman. When you go and read 2 Kings chapter 4 from verse 8, she was considered as a woman of influence, a well-to-do woman. That is not just a word that they've thrown into the Bible just to paint a hazy picture. No, she was a well-to-do woman. And I wonder if Elisha sat in that house and looked around and thought to himself, wow, what a beautiful house. I wonder whether he thought to himself, you know what, maybe this house was filled with opulence. I wonder whether he looked at the granite tabletops and the marble floors and the crystal chandeliers hanging from the high roof, and he wondered to himself, what a beautiful house. I wondered whether he walked to the balcony and he looked over the amazing scenery. I wonder whether he looked at the painting on the wall of this lovely couple and thought to himself, wow, this couple has found great love. They love each other. I wonder whether he thought about her standing in society, for her to be considered to be a woman of great influence. And I wonder whether he sat there and he's thinking to himself that all these blessings that this woman has, the contentment that she has, to the point that even when given a chance to petition the king, of which many of us will kill for that, she says no. The contentment that God has given us. And I wonder if Elisha retreated to his room and probably was sitting there and puzzled and wondering to himself, God has come through for this woman in so many areas of her life. He has. He has. But has she forgotten all of that? Has she forgotten what God has done for her? And I wonder if he asked himself, is this the same God who has blessed this lady so much, has blessed her family so much, that she's now beginning to doubt so strongly? Has she allowed her circumstance to limit her faith in God? Because in verse 17 we are told the prophecy came true. Sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant. And at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elisha had said. So the prophecy came true. Church, the enemy, and please hear me on this one, the enemy wants to give you spiritual amnesia. He wants you to forget the things that God has done for you. He wants to show you that God doesn't care for you. He wants to coax you into forgetting what God has already done so that you do not trust him for your needs today. He wants to amplify your problems so that you can see how enormous they are, so you can forget the track record of your God. Here's what I want to say to us, that you must fight hard to reject the lie of the enemy. That when we get to the place where our faith is low, when you get to the place where you're running on empty, you must recall every goodness of God in every area of your life so that you can regain your perspective of who God is. And I'm here to tell us today that don't let your circumstances limit your faith in God. Many, like this woman, might have despaired and given up thinking that God doesn't care. But Elisha's desire to bless this woman is a picture of God's heart desiring to bless his children, especially those of us who are content in him. You see, the blessing may not come in the way that we anticipate, but I want to guarantee you that when the blessing comes, it will come in the best way for you. I am here to encourage us that our God sees our secret wishes, even the ones that you have suppressed, even the ones that you don't want to talk about, that no goes on. There is nothing that he doesn't know about your life. God knew her desires, and I want to tell you today that God knows your desires. You know, the thing is that I'm coming to realize that our no-go zones are not so much about God not having come through yet, as they are about us forgetting or losing the perspective of what God has already done. Let me say that again. I'm coming to realize more and more, even as I've been preparing this message, that our no-go zones, those things that we don't even want to take to God, those things that we don't even want to talk about, are not so much so that about God not having come through yet. It's not because that God hasn't come through yet that we have that no-go zone, but it is about us losing perspective of what God has already done. As I prepared this message, I thought of all the wonders that God has worked through me and in my life. It was a difficult message to prepare, because many of the times we come into a place like this and you're like, I don't want you to tell me that I can trust in God. No. And it's a difficult thing to say these things, especially in your situation. And as I prepared this message, and I thought to myself, the wonders of the things that God has done in my life. And I was remembered when I was young and how God took care of us. I remember when my mom had to walk out of her marriage with 3 boys and a toddler girl, kicked out on the street, no money, no future. Those dreams we're talking about, and I didn't have any future. All those dreams faded away. No family name. We didn't even know where to belong, because my father's side had abandoned us. We didn't know whether to go to my mother's side. But look at me standing here today. And God is using me to transform generations. I am not only a leader in generation, not only in this city, but across the world. I remember when I was dead broke and jobless, and I couldn't even raise 10 shillings to buy a soda. I couldn't be able to even afford to buy a soda. And I stand here today, and I know that this is the story for many of us. I stand here today, and I've dined in some of the finest restaurants in different continents. And I'm not saying this to brag, because I know what God has done for me. I know where God has brought me from. I was so disillusioned about marriage because of what my father did. But I stand here today and I share great memories and moments with my wife for many years. And that's the God that I serve. So I know your situation seems very impossible at this very moment. But I want to tell you, don't let your circumstance limit your faith in God. We can't allow that to happen. Friends, I'm here to ask us today that we must deliver ourselves from a faith of convenience. That we have faith that only when things are moving in our favor. That's the only way, that's the only time that we're looking to God's direction. Only when things are moving to our favor. And I'm asking us to do away with that faith of convenience. Even though sometimes circumstances can seem to contradict the fact that God is watching over our lives and that He's orchestrating events for our good, still do not allow your circumstance to dictate how much faith you must have in God. I need to learn this message. When you lean deep into this story, you will actually find and see that the woman might have been an impediment to her blessing. Because on the one hand, she's serving God diligently. She's taking care of God's servant. But then on the other hand, when God finally responds to her request, what does she do? She pulls back. She puts up a wall. And she says, no, God, we can't go there. And I'm asking you not to be an impediment to your blessing, to what God has for you. So don't let your circumstances limit your faith in God. Here is the thing that I want to tell us today. I am not here to tell you that God can instantaneously answer your prayer or will do that. I'm not here to tell you that today or tomorrow you will receive your miracle. That's not what I'm here to tell you. Although our God is not limited to what you and I do or don't do, His sovereignty can allow Him to answer your prayer right now when we're still sitting here. That's a God that we serve. But we must get to the place where we begin to believe God despite our circumstances. So don't let your circumstances limit your faith in God. You have a Father who cares for you. You have a Father who's concerned about your situation. You see, we don't know how long this woman waited for a child. Maybe it was years, maybe it was decades that she was still waiting for this child. But God still cared enough for her unmet needs. God still cared enough that he sent Elisha to go to her and ask her what she wants. And maybe that's a question that God is asking you today. And through me, he's asking you, what do you want? What do you want? You see, here's the thing. Some of us have sort of cordoned off. You know, we've put a nice picket fence. We've put just a high wall where we never go into those spaces. Our dreams have died. Our desires have died because we feel like God has disappointed us. And we've never brought it back to God because we are so disappointed. And maybe God is asking you today, what do you want? And I want you to name it. What are those dreams? What are those desires that you've always had? And I want you to name them. And my prayer is that your answer will be, no, I'm okay. You know, God, let's not go there because you'll disappoint me. My hope and prayer is that when God asks you that question, you will have an answer because He knows that your heart desires. And your heart is crying for God's intervention in that situation. So don't let your circumstance limit your faith in God. I would like to challenge us today. To go into the no-go zone. I want to challenge you to go back there. Those things that you have left, those things that you have lost hope in. I want you to go back there and I want you to open it up for God. I want you to open it up for God and acknowledge that deep desire that you have had for many years or many months. And no one else even knows. You're the only one who knows. The unmet need that if left unattended, you know very well you will run low on your trust in God. That unmet need, I want you to open it up to God because in acknowledging your spoken or unspoken desires, what you're doing is that you're inviting God to take that journey with you. We don't know how long this woman waited. But I want to encourage you that God is willing to walk this journey with you because He reminds us that His grace is sufficient for you. He may not answer the way you think He should, but you should trust Him. You should trust Him when He does because it will be in the way that is best for you. And I want to ask you, don't lose your perspective in God's ability. Don't lose your perspective in God's ability. And most importantly, don't let your circumstances limit your faith in God.